In a fit of rage, I called the hotel where my wife, Jessica, was entertaining her affair partner. The words were stuck in my throat, bitter and acrid, as if speaking them would solidify the nightmare into reality. When the receptionist connected me to their room, I clenched the phone tightly, my knuckles widening with the force. A deep, guttural anger bubbled up, eclipsing every other emotion. "Donnie," I said, my voice a low growl. "Listen carefully. If her son dies before I talk to her, I will find you and kill you with my bare hands." There was silence on the other end, heavy and punctuated by the faint rustling of sheets. Then, I heard him mumble something incoherent before handing her the phone. Her voice, so familiar yet dripping with a tone I hadn't heard in years, was casual, mocking even. "Yes," she said, as though she were answering a call from a telemarketer. "When you're done having fun with your boyfriend, please come to the hospital emergency room," I snapped. The silence on her end stretched for a second too long. I hung up without waiting for her response, my hand shaking as I slammed the receiver down. The hospital's fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, matching the noise in my head. My son, Ethan, was in critical condition after an accident, a fact that seemed to weigh less heavily on Jessica than her extramarital escapades. In that moment, I felt an explosive mix of fury, disbelief, and anguish. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the timing, the audacity, the sheer heartlessness. How had I not seen it sooner? I paced the cold hospital waiting room, my mind racing. I replayed every moment of the last 6 months, the subtle changes in her behavior, Jessica's sudden work trips, her evasive answers, and the way she had started avoiding me, not with outright hostility, but with the dismissive indifference of someone who had already checked out of our marriage. Had it all been a lie? The years, the promises, the shared laughter? I stared at the double doors leading to the intensive care unit where Ethan lay unconscious and hooked up to machines. My stomach churned. He was just a kid and he needed his mom. But instead of being here for him, she was tangled in another man's sheets. The thought was unbearable. Jessica crossed her arms, her expression hardening. "You're being dramatic," she said, her voice laced with irritation. "Donnie called because he cares. At least someone does." I stared at her, disbelief and fury warring inside me. "You're unbelievable," I said, my voice low but trembling with anger. "You don't even see the irony in what you're saying, do you? You're tearing this family apart, Jessica. And you're trying to pin it on me?" She scoffed. "This family? What family, David? The one where you're never around? The one where I feel like a ghost in my own home? Don't act like you're some saint." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady for Ethan's sake, even though he wasn't here to hear this. "This isn't about me, Jessica. It's about Ethan. It's about the vows we made, the promises we built our lives on. You broke them, and now you're acting like it's my fault." Her eyes flicked away, but the defiance in her stance didn't waver. "Believe what you want. I'm not going to sit here and let you guilt me for being unhappy. For finding something, someone, that makes me feel alive. You call this alive?" I shot back, gesturing toward the house. "This mess? This chaos? Our son is lying in a hospital bed, fighting for his life, and you're prioritizing some fling over him. Over us." Jessica's lip curled in disdain. "Don't lecture me about priorities. You've spent years choosing your job over your family. You're just mad because now I've chosen myself." The sheer audacity of her words left me momentarily speechless. The weight of her betrayal, her deflection, her utter lack of remorse, it was suffocating. I took a step closer, my voice dropping to a dangerous calm. "I don't care what excuses you make for yourself. You've betrayed me, and worse, you've betrayed Ethan. He deserves better. I deserve better." She rolled her eyes, but there was a flicker of something, uncertainty, perhaps, in her gaze. "Fine, David. If you want to play the martyr, go ahead. But don't think for a second that I'm going to beg for your forgiveness." I exhaled sharply, shaking my head. "I don't need your apologies, Jessica. What I need is for you to decide if you're going to be a mother to Ethan or keep playing house with Donnie. Because if you can't choose him over this, over you, then I will." Jessica glared at me, but she didn't respond. Instead, she grabbed her purse and headed for the stairs. "I'm going to bed," she said, her tone flat. "Do whatever you want." As her footsteps receded, I felt the weight of the silence settle over the house again. I sank onto the couch, the fight drained out of me for the moment. The whiskey sat untouched on the table, the cracked glass a reminder of my frayed composure. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. But as I sat there, staring into the dark, I made a vow. I would fight for Ethan, for his future, for his safety. And I would make sure that Jessica's recklessness didn't destroy the one thing I had left that mattered. The battle lines were drawn. The house fell silent, the only sound the faint ticking of the clock on the mantel. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, and rubbed my hands over my face. The exhaustion wasn't just physical, it felt like it was rooted in my soul. Ethan. I couldn't let him down, not now, not ever. He deserved stability, love, and a future free of the chaos Jessica was so determined to drag us into. The weight of it all pressed heavily on me, but amidst the despair, there was a spark of resolve. I grabbed my phone and opened a message thread with my lawyer. I hated the thought of taking legal action against Jessica, but I couldn't ignore the reality anymore. Her choices weren't just affecting me, they were endangering Ethan. Me. I need to talk. Urgent. Custody arrangements. The message sent, and I stared at the screen, waiting for the read receipt. A part of me hoped Jessica would snap out of it, that something would wake her up to what she was risking. But the rational part of me knew better. She'd made her choice, and now I had to make mine. My phone buzzed a moment later. A reply. "Lawyer, call me first thing in the morning. We'll figure it out." I set the phone down and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. It wasn't the solution I wanted, but it was the one Ethan needed. The following morning, the tension in the house was palpable. Jessica stayed in the bedroom, likely avoiding me, while I got ready to visit Ethan. As I poured a cup of coffee, my phone buzzed again, this time from the hospital. "Hellos," I answered, my heart immediately leaping to my throat. "Mr. Cooper, this is Dr. Reynolds. Ethan's awake and asking for you. He's doing well, but I think seeing you would help him a lot." Relief flooded through me, so sharp and overwhelming it made my knees weak. "Thank you. I'll be there soon." Hanging up, I grabbed my keys and a jacket, not bothering to inform Jessica. If she wanted to know about Ethan, she'd have to ask. Her indifference last night had made one thing painfully clear. This was a fight I'd have to face on my own. The drive to the hospital passed in a blur, and when I stepped into Ethan's room, the sight of him sitting up in bed, pale but smiling faintly, nearly broke me. "Hey, bud," I said, forcing my voice to sound steady as I approached his bedside. "Hey, Dad," Ethan croaked, his voice weak but full of warmth. "Where's Mom?" I swallowed hard, sitting down beside him and taking his hand. "She's at home," I said carefully. "But I'm here. How are you feeling?" He shrugged, his small shoulders looking impossibly frail. "Okay, I guess. Better than before." "Are you mad at Mom?" The question hit like a gut punch, and I struggled to keep my expression neutral. "Ethan, your mom and we're having a tough time right now. But that doesn't change how much we both love you." He nodded slowly, but the sadness in his eyes made my heart ache. "I'll always be here for you," I promised, squeezing his hand gently. "No matter what." For the first time in days, Ethan smiled, a real, genuine smile. And in that moment, I knew I would do whatever it took to protect him, to give him the life he deserved, even if it meant leaving Jessica behind. The rest of the visit with Ethan was bittersweet. He seemed to grow stronger with every word, every reassuring smile. But the weight of what lay ahead lingered in the back of my mind. When a nurse came in to check on him, I stepped into the hallway to call my lawyer. "Mr. Cooper," the lawyer greeted me. "I reviewed your previous custody agreement. If you're ready to pursue a modification, we can begin by gathering documentation. We'll need evidence, anything that demonstrates why your son's well-being is at risk." My stomach twisted. What kind of evidence? Messages, witnesses, incidents of neglect or endangerment. Anything that shows a pattern of behavior. I knew what he meant. but the thought of documenting Jessica's failures felt both intrusive and disloyal. Despite everything, she was Ethan's mother. "I'll work on it," I said reluctantly. "Good. We can file an emergency petition for temporary custody once we have enough to make our case. Keep me updated." I hung up and leaned against the wall. A deep breath steadied me, but I couldn't shake the gnawing sense of guilt. For years, I'd tried to shield Ethan from the cracks in our family. Now I had to expose them. Returning to Ethan's room, I found him dozing peacefully. A small, fragile sense of peace settled over me. Whatever the cost, he was worth it. Back at home that evening, Jessica was waiting in the kitchen. Her arms were crossed, her expression unreadable. "You didn't tell me you were going to see Ethan," she said, her tone accusatory. "I figured you'd know where I was," I replied evenly. "You didn't ask last night." Her face darkened, and she looked away. I was overwhelmed. I needed time to process everything. "Jessica, this isn't about us anymore," I said, keeping my voice calm but firm. "It's about Ethan. He needs both of us, and right now he needs stability. Can you give him that?" Her gaze snapped back to me, sharp and defensive. "Are you saying I can't take care of my own son?" "I'm saying your choices are putting him at risk," I said. "And I can't let that happen." She opened her mouth to argue, but closed it just as quickly. For a moment, vulnerability flashed in her eyes. "I've made mistakes," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm trying." "Then prove it," I said. "Put Ethan first. Get help if you need it. But if you can't—" I hesitated, the words tasting bitter. "If you can't, I will." Her jaw tightened, and tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't respond. Instead, she turned and left the room, her footsteps fading upstairs. The following weeks were a whirlwind of preparation and quiet tension. Jessica remained distant, barely engaging with me or Ethan. Every interaction felt like walking on a tightrope, balancing the need for civility with the gravity of what lay ahead. One night, I sat in my office, poring over documents and emails. A folder of evidence was steadily growing, screenshots of Jessica's erratic messages, notes on missed school pickups, accounts from neighbors about Ethan being left unsupervised. Each piece felt like a betrayal, but I knew it was necessary. The sound of small footsteps broke my concentration. I looked up to see Ethan standing in the doorway, clutching his blanket. "Can't sleep, buddy?" I asked gently. He shook his head and came to sit on my lap. "I had a bad dream." I wrapped my arms around him, holding him close. "Want to tell me about it?" He hesitated, then whispered, "Mom was yelling, and you were gone." I didn't know where to go. My heart twisted. "Ethan, listen to me," I said, looking him in the eyes. "I will always be here for you. No matter what happens, you'll never have to face anything alone. Okay?" He nodded slowly, and I carried him back to his bed, staying until his breathing evened out. As I watched him sleep, the weight of responsibility settled on my shoulders anew. This wasn't just about custody, it was about giving Ethan the security and love he deserved. The court date arrived faster than I expected. Jessica and I sat on opposite sides of a small, sterile courtroom. She looked tired, her face pale and drawn. I wondered if she'd been sleeping at all. For a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for her. But then I thought of Ethan, of his fear, his confusion, his unshakable trust in me. That was what mattered. The judge entered, and the proceedings began. My lawyer presented our case with methodical precision, outlining the evidence and emphasizing Ethan's need for stability. Jessica's lawyer countered with arguments about her love for her son and her efforts to improve. When it was Jessica's turn to speak, she stood and addressed the judge. "I know I've made mistakes," she said, her voice trembling. "I love my son more than anything in this world. I've been struggling, but I'm trying to get better. Please don't take him away from me." Her words were heartfelt, but they were also laced with desperation. I could see the judge taking notes, her expression neutral but attentive. Finally, it was my turn. Standing, I looked directly at the judge. "Your Honor, I'm not here to punish Jessica. I know she loves Ethan. But love isn't always enough. He needs stability, consistency, and a safe environment to grow up in. That's what I'm asking for Ethan's sake. When the judge adjourned the session to deliberate, I felt a mixture of relief and dread. The waiting was agonizing, but I knew we'd done everything we could. When the judge returned with her decision, the room fell silent. She began by acknowledging the complexity of the case and the emotions involved. Then she announced a ruling. I would be granted primary custody, with Jessica receiving supervised visitation until she could demonstrate significant improvement in her circumstances. Jessica let out a quiet sob, her head dropping into her hands. My heart ached for her, but there was also a sense of profound relief. Ethan would be safe. That was all that mattered. Later that night, as I tucked Ethan into bed, he looked up at me with sleepy eyes. "Does this mean I'll be with you all the time now?" he asked. I nodded, brushing his hair back. "Yeah, buddy. You'll be staying with me." A small smile spread across his face, and he snuggled into his pillow. I liked that I sat by his side until he fell asleep, my heart full of both gratitude and determination. This was the start of a new chapter, a chance to rebuild, to heal, and to give Ethan the life he deserved. And I would do everything in my power to make it a good one. The days after the court ruling felt surreal, a mix of quiet relief and the enormity of what lay ahead. Jessica didn't call or reach out, and while part of me was relieved to avoid confrontation, another part of me wondered how she was coping. Ethan, on the other hand, seemed lighter. There was a noticeable ease in his demeanor. He laughed more, slept better, and began to thrive in small but meaningful ways. It was as if the storm cloud that had hung over him was finally clearing one afternoon. As we were sitting at the kitchen table working on a jigsaw puzzle, Ethan glanced up at me. "Do you think Mom's okay?" he asked quietly. I paused, choosing my words carefully. "I think she's trying to figure some things out. But she loves you, Ethan." "Don't ever doubt that," he nodded, looking back at the puzzle pieces. "I miss her sometimes." I reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. "That's okay, buddy. It's okay to miss her. We'll figure out a way for you to spend time with her when it's safe and when she's ready." He gave me a small smile, and we went back to the puzzle. But his question lingered in my mind. No matter how much I wanted to shield him from pain, I knew I couldn't erase the bond he had with Jessica, or the complicated feelings that came with it. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into creating a stable routine for Ethan. Mornings were filled with breakfast and school drop-offs, evenings with homework and bedtime stories. Weekends became our time for adventures, visits to the park, movie nights, and even a camping trip in the backyard. One evening, as we sat by the fire pit roasting marshmallows, Ethan looked up at the stars. "Do you think things will ever go back to how they were?" he asked. I hesitated, knowing honesty was important. "I don't think things will go back to exactly how they were, Ethan. But that's not always a bad thing. Sometimes, when things change, it gives us a chance to make something even better." He seemed to mull this over, then nodded. "Like how we made this fire better with more wood." I chuckled, ruffling his hair. Exactly about a month later, I received a letter from Jessica. Her handwriting was shaky, the words uneven, but the sentiment was clear. She apologized for everything, for the chaos, the hurt, and the times she'd let Ethan down. She explained that she was starting therapy and attending parenting classes, and she asked if she could see Ethan when the time was right. I read the letter twice, feeling a swirl of emotions. Part of me wanted to shut the door on the pain and keep moving forward. But another part knew that Ethan deserved a chance to have a relationship with his mother, if she could truly make the changes she promised. When I showed the letter to Ethan, he read it carefully, his face a mix of curiosity and hope. "Does this mean I can see her?" he asked. I nodded. "We'll take it slow. But yes, I think so." The first supervised visit was tentative but hopeful. Jessica looked healthier, her demeanor calmer. She brought a small toy for Ethan, a model airplane, and they spent the hour talking and playing. When it was time to leave, Ethan hugged her tightly, and she whispered something in his ear that made him smile. As we drove home, Ethan held the airplane in his lap, a contented look on his face. "Mom seemed happy," he said. "She did," I agreed. "And I'm happy for her." In that moment, I realized that while the journey ahead wouldn't be easy, it held the possibility of healing for all of us. And as I glanced at Ethan in the rearview mirror, I knew that every step we took was worth it. For him, for his future, and for the love that would always guide us forward.